Hello everyone, hope you are doing good. In this video tutorial, you are going to learn how to include forms in your web pages. Two types of websites as we have discussed many times in the class, static website and dynamic website, right? So whenever the same information is getting displayed for every user every time, then it is called static website, right? So whether you are referring and I'm everyone will get the same kind of information unless they update it. If there is any update, the update will be same for everyone, right? So that kind of website is called static website. So in this basic web design course, you will learn this static. You're learning this static, how to design static website, right? So dynamic website, in other hand, is a web page that displays different content for different user or in different time, right? So for example, let's take your Canvas account. So that is dynamic website because if you enter your username and password, it will lead you to some web page. And if I access the Canvas, it will lead to some other different page, right? So it will display different content for different user for different time, right? So those kind of websites are called dynamic websites. So when we speak about the dynamic website, when we speak about the static website, it's all about learning HTML and CSS, right? In this course, we are just focusing on HTML and CSS because those are the languages that we need to display the static website. For dynamic website, we need a bunch of programming languages. Mainly, we can classify those languages into two types: client-side scripting language and server-side scripting language. So client-side scripting language is something like the web page respond to whatever action is done by the user. Web pages response according to the user input. So if that happens, that is happening because of the client-side scripting languages. So I'm not sure whether you have heard of these languages if you're from other major. So if you have JavaScript or jQuery, there are a bunch of different languages or that can perform the client-side scripting actions. So to explain this, I'm the instructor for the advanced web design concept. So I'll show you some of the code that we practice in advanced web design concept so that you'll understand what is JavaScript, how it is different from HTML and CSS. Okay, so you can look at this web page that we have designed. So you can look at this. When I click this, you can see the API opens up this page, right? So whenever the clicking action, so the action is clicking, the user clicks that particular image, then it expands and shows the slide. So it acts the displays the image in bigger size as a screenshot, right? So that kind of action for the users, that kind of response for the user. So you can see when I hover over the image, you can see the name appears. So those kind of things are happening because of the client-side scripting language. I'll show you one more example for client-side scripting language. So you can see when I hover over, this is another program that is designed by JavaScript. So you can see when I hover over the image, the background of that icon changes, right? So that is happening because of the JavaScript. And when I click it, so it is moving to the cart. So those kind of animations are possible because of the client-side scripting language. So this is the action and the web page respond to the action by the user. So this is called client-side scripting language. Okay. So JavaScript, jQuery, Flash, these are the languages that allows a web page to respond to client's events. We name it, we say it as events. So the actions or request for a response for a particular action is called events. Okay. So that is about client-side scripting language. And then let's see what is server-side scripting language. Server-side scripting language is something like when a visitor, let's see like this. Whenever you are entering into the canvas, you are providing your username and password, right? So what is happening after that? What is the background process after you enter your username and password? So the username and password will be sent to the server, right? So I will open up a page. So whenever you enter username and password, what will happen? So the username and password, sorry, I'm just using this. This is new, the board. So I'm using it for the first time. So I'm just getting used to this. Sorry. Okay, so you are entering username and password. Oh, sorry. Username and this is password, right? So when you enter it, what happens behind the screen? So that will be sent to server. In server, there are two components that is working together to process your request, which is validated by the user name and password, right? So the server has PHP interpreter or server-side scripting language, and then a database management system like SQL. I don't know whether you have heard of SQL. So SQL is a database management language. So when you enter this username and password, the server has a language called server-side scripting language, right? So it has PHP or some server-side scripting language that process the input. How it process the username and password? It will reach out to the database where we have the data, that is the username and password will be saved as data. So it will just go to the database manager. It will just go to the server-side scripting language. The server-side scripting language will contact the database which has all the information like username and password. So it will just validate whether there is a match in the username and password. If it found the match, then it will react. It will respond that something like true. Yes, there is a match. So then as per the server side scripting coding, so everything is code. Whatever I'm saying here, so everything is written as code. So then the code written in PHP will respond to the user's request and open up the canvas page for you, right? So what is happening? It will reach out to the server. Server has some server-side scripting language which is associated with some database management system which will check the username and password for us, and then it will react to the PHP interpreter, then the server side, that means server-side language, and then it will the server will respond to the user's request. So this is called client-side scripting, and this is called server-side scripting, right? It's not client-side scripting. It's what we are doing in our HTML, right? So what you are going to learn in this particular chapter is very simple. You don't need to worry about these things. These things I just explained to show you what is happening behind the screen when we give some information. So you don't need to worry about. So if you want to learn these concepts, you can take the advanced web design course. But in this particular chapter, we are going to learn how to create this form. So these are called form, right? The place where the user can provide some kind of information, right? So that is called form. So you are going to learn how to create HTML forms, right? So there are different kind of forms that we are going to learn. So if you understand this concept, then we can move on to the subject. Sorry if it looks like a scribbling. I'm just getting used to this whiteboard tool. I just bought it today, so it takes some time for me to get used to this tool. Okay, let's get into the concept. Okay, so forms. So as I have explained, you're going to learn how the forms work, right? Form is it provides the interaction between the end user and server. So that's what we learned here. So the forms are the acts like a bridges that provides the interaction between the user and the server. So this is the interaction, the bridges. Okay. So that is what we are going to. 1 minute, I will erase this. So that is what we are going to learn. Okay, so forms. So what kind of forms? So what is form? So you might have understood what we are going to learn particularly. So we are going to learn how to create such form elements, form controls in our web pages that will provide the interaction between the web page and the user, right? So forms are used to gather any kind of information from the user. So without form, you cannot get any information, whether it could be a simple click. It's not a navigation is not form, but any kind of click. For example, if you're doing a if you're saying agree for some terms, then you will click the submit button to agree the terms. So that is a form element. For example, let's say your Google search engine, all kind of search engine, there are form elements, right? For example, you can see this is a Google, some kind of search engine page where you can see one simple text area and then submit button, right? Any kind of search engine will have these two elements. A search area, so to enter the keyword, and the submit button, which will send the keywords that what we have entered to the server to perform the searching, right? So that is a simple form, right? So a search area, 1 minute. So any kind of search engine will have a text area to enter our input and the submit button to pass that input to the server, right? So that is some kind of, that is a simple form. All the search engine will have the simple form, right? Okay. So let's see what are the two components behind the form. As I have specified, the two components behind the form includes the HTML form, which we are going to learn in this chapter, and the server-side scripting. So server-side processing, which I have explained, right? How the server respond to in the previous explanation, what I have explained on the server-side processing. So that is the one thing, and the HTML form is the another thing. So you don't need to worry about the server-side processing thing, which is an advanced concept. And you're going to learn how to create the form. Without this HTML form, without the username and password, the text box, there is no way that you can access the canvas, right? So that is the first step. So that you're going to learn how to create those kind of form elements, form controls, okay? So let's get into the concept. How to create form elements. So what are the tags? In other words, what are the tags that we use to create form, right? So this very simple as usual, like any other tags. HTML is very easy language. So simply you're going to use these two. Simply you're going to use these two tags to create a form, right? So simply we can say whatever you want to input, whether it could be a submit button or text. There are different type of form elements out there. So whether it is a text area or it is a text command area or a radio button, right? Radio button or checkbox, right? So any kind of whatever the control that is provided to get the user information, to provide the interaction between the user and page, right? So those are form controls. So whatever form control the form is going to have, all those form controls should be coded between these two tags. It should be coded between these two tags, okay? So it should wrap up all the controls, the form tag and the ending form tag. So what you are particularly going to learn is what are the different tags to include different kind of form controls. That's what you're going to learn. Okay, so before going into that different controls, let's focus on the form tag. That means this form tag. What are the attributes the form tag, a particular form tag is going to have? So you know what is attribute, right? Attribute is something that explains more about the particular element, particular tag. So that speaks more about that particular tag. So what are the attributes this form tag can have? So you can refer the PPT. So these are the main attributes a form can have. So far, whatever you have learned, so you have just used one or two attributes with each tag, but this form attribute have lot of essential, form tag has lot of essential attributes. So you can see the first attribute is action. So this action attribute, what is this one? This attribute says about the server-side scripting program. Server-side scripting program, that is the server-side scripting language, a file. So to explain this, I'm planning to show you a real demo of how this form works. So in our advanced course, we do everything because this is since it is server-side scripting language, I have to connect with the server. So since we are not publishing anything, for the practice, we use a development server. That is, we are making our own laptop as a server. Instead of publishing it in some server, we make our system as a server called development server. So this is the development server page. I just on it. So you can see I'm going to access the development server space. That is localhost is the development server space. If you don't understand these things, that's fine. I'm just trying to explain the HTML component of this space. It may seem complicated to you. I'm just trying to explain how the form works. So you can see in the development server using the server-side scripting language, I have written a code to add some publication details. For example, some random thing pops up. I'm just giving some values. So you can see whatever value that I have entered is getting entered here, right? So if I want to delete the record, you can see I deleted the record, right? So this is this is some dynamic website concept. So I just want you to focus in the code. Let me show the code for this. So the development server space, I have written a code. So you can, all I want you to focus is, it may seem complicated to you. I'm just trying to explain this thing. So just focus on this thing. Do you see a form tag is there? Action. Action is the attribute, right? Action is the attribute that has a value. What is the value of the attribute? SQL test.php. What is that SQL test.php? This is the code. This is the file name for the code where I have written. So you can see this is SQL test.php. So it is referring the same file. So it is referring the code, code where I have written the code, a file where I have written the code to perform all this task. Okay, that is action. So that is going to be the value of this action attribute. Server-side script program script. The name of the file should be passed as a value to the action. So that's what I have given here. So the action has the value to the code where I have written a program to perform all this task. So it is simply a server-side scripting file name and the method. Okay, so you can see I have specified the method as post. So what is method? So method is a way to send information. So there are two types of values a method can have, get or post. What is the difference? A get means the entered value, the value entered by the user. So for example, if I'm entering some author, so the entered value is sent to the server, right? So how it is sent to the server? There are two ways. Either it could be sent in the URL. So this is the URL page, right? So it could be sent here with the other information, or it could be sent in a secured way. Okay. So if it is sent in a URL, which is less secured way, anyone can see if I am, even if I am sending the username and password using the get method, then the username and password will be sent through the URL, right? So that is less secured way. And if it is sent through the URL, then it is called get method. If it is sent as a separate HTTP entity, it's in a separate way, it's a separate bundle, if the information is sent to the server, then it is post method. Okay, so you can see in my code, the server-side scripting language, I used post. Mostly we prefer, we will, unless or otherwise it is just a page information or any public information. For a public information we can use get, but if it is more secured information from the user that we are getting, then we are supposed to use post, because that is more secured way, right? So that is about methods. And then what else? Autocomplete. So you might have noticed when I enter this, automatically some value pops up, right? So I'm just entering the value which is which automatically pops up from the browser, right? So that is called autocomplete. So either you can set autocomplete on and off. Here I didn't specify any values, any attribute for the autocomplete. You can see I didn't specify any particular attribute for autocomplete. I just specified two attributes. But this autocomplete, when you're not specifying it, it is by default. You can see even though I didn't specify it, it is working. The autocomplete is working. What does it mean? By default, autocomplete is on. So if you don't want to specify the autocomplete, if you don't want it to happen, then what you have to do? You have to add autocomplete off. If you specify it externally, then it will just carry out that order. So by default, the autocomplete is on. Okay, so that is form control. So the name and ID. So as usual, any form, any form, name of the form. If a page has lot of forms, it should have its own. Each form should have its own name and ID to get referred, right? So those name and ID, like any other tags, it should have its own name and ID to get referred. Okay, so these are the attributes. Now we are entering into the very important thing that we are going to learn in this chapter, that is form control. So as I have explained, how we are going to create different form controls, a text area or checkbox or a radio button or submit button, how we are going to create different kind of form controls. Okay, so that is the main concept of this particular chapter practice. Okay, so there are different type of forms are available: text boxes, scrolling text boxes for comment areas, a list of selection, right? List of selection. I'll explain everything in detail. Radio button, checkbox, and then submit button. So there are different types of form controls out there, and we are going to learn everything one by one in this chapter. Okay, so for all this, luckily for all, even though we have a lot of, like we can say, I'll show you in W3 School website. If you go to that W3 School website, you can see a button, checkbox, a color, I'll show you what is the color one. Not only the text box, text area, there are different types of buttons available. Radio button, so you can see how the radio button works, right? So this is one form control, and then checkbox form control, right? And then color, to type the color, right? So you can see when you click onto that, the color will appears here. So that is one type of form control. And even for the date, we have some different form control. So let's see the date information. So you can see this is some kind of form control that gets the information date information from the user. So there are different types of form controls are there available. So we are going to learn one by one, but luckily it's easy to learn everything because we are not going to use different tags for different form controls. Everything is going to use only one tag called input tag. So there is only one tag that just controls all these form controls, that is input tag. Only we are going to change the value of the type attribute. So the attribute for this input tag is called type, right? So we are just going to change the value of the type attribute to display different type of form controls. So if you are going to use the submit button, then the value of this submit attribute, type attribute is going to be button. So if you're going to use the checkbox, then the value of the type attribute is going to be checkbox. So month, number. So there are different types of controls that we are going to include just by changing the value of the type attribute. Right? Got it? Okay. So we'll learn one by one. So the first type that we are going to learn is text box. How to include a simple text box like this. How to include a simple text box like this. So that text box could be for username or it could be for anything or what else. Even search engine has a keyword input box, right? So it could be for anything. So how to include a simple text box. So if you go to your student file, where if you go to 10.1 folder, you can see this simple code to include the text box and submit button. So open up the code for that. So you can see the form, you know the meaning of everything, right? I'm just starting it from the form. So you can see form, since we are not including any server-side processing, action is not there, but simply method is there. You can see the method can have two values, get and post. Here I am simply using get method. That means the value what I have entered will be sent through the URL. So you can see the email. Here simply I am specifying the email. So inside this, if I want to include this form control, text box control, you have to specify this input type text and the name of the box. So name of the box is name of the control that is understood by the server or a browser, and then ID. So name and ID will be associated with all form elements. Okay, so then after that there is another type, input type, submit button. So for include the submit control, you have to just specify the value submit. So for text box, you have to simply specify the value text, and then to include the submit box, submit button, you have to simply include the value of the type attribute submit, right? And then value, whatever you are specifying here, that will appear in the top of the button. So sign me up means it will say sign me up, or if you want to say submit, for example, I'm just changing it to submit. So save, refresh, you can say now it says submit, right? So whatever value you are entering inside the value attribute, that will appear on the top of that button, right? So the submit, all the submit button will have that option. And then input type reset button, by default it will have reset, but if you want you can change the value like here. It could be change or let's say reset in caps. You can see I can change the control. Okay, so in this code you have just learned two controls, how to include text and how to include submit button and how to include reset button. So what is the difference between the submit button and reset button? So if you specify the value submit, it will just send the information which you have entered to a server. Like we didn't have any action page here, but in real world there will be some action page, then only it is a working form. So the information whatever you have entered, the client entered, will be sent to that action of PHP coding or server-side scripting coding, what I have explained before. So that that will be sent to that if you click on to the submit button. The reset button, what it will do, it will just reset the value to what the previous value or nothing. It will reset all those values. Okay, so that's how the reset button will work. So you have learned three types of form controls in this code. I'm just moving on. Before moving on to the next form controls, I want you to look at these attributes that each form control is going to have. So this is pretty much same for all form controls, whether it is text box or whether it is so you can just refer the W3 school website, whatever input type it is going to have, it is pretty much, all those types pretty much has all these controlling attributes. Okay, so I just want you to take some, you can just pause the video and go through that and try to understand what are they. The name is the name of the text box. So for example, here the name of the text box, sorry, I have closed that code. So the name of the text box, and then ID of that particular, whether it is text box or any control, name of the control, ID of the control, and size is something like, I'll open up the page again. Size is something like, size is something like how many configures the width of the text box. So how big the width should be. You didn't specify any control here in the code, but by default it will have some value. But if you want to have the control, you don't want this big code. If you want to have the control over the size, then you can use this size attribute. And then max length attribute, a numeric value, how many, what is the length of the user input. For example, you can see you just want to display only 10 or 20 characters. So you can, or you want to specify the control over number of characters entered by the user. You can do that by max length attribute. And the value attribute, but you may have the control over the user input. For example, if it is roll ID, roll number, you don't want to have the alphabetical input. You just want to have the numerical input. So you can just specify that restriction by specifying the value attribute, right? And then disable, if you don't want to get some information from the user until a particular, for example, the submit button, in most of the forms, the submit button will not work until you check the I agree terms, I agree checkbox, right? So you are disabling the submit button until you say the user click the I agree button, I agree checkbox. So those kind of disabling option is needed. So that is provided by the disable button. So if you specify the disabled attribute value as disabled, then the particular form control will be disabled. Okay. So there are a lot of users. The one user case is what I have specified, which everyone is familiar, right? So there are all the form controls need this disabled attribute for some reason. For it depends on the application, right? The read only, some form controls, some values should be in the read only format. It should not get the user input. So for that you can use the read only. And then autocomplete, as I have specified, by default it is on, but you can just switch it to off if you don't want to get the information from the user by autocomplete. Autofocus, so autofocus, after entering the input from one form control to move on to another form control automatically. For example, when you enter the user text area email information, automatically the control moves to the submit button without you physically move the cursor location, then it is called autofocus. And then list, data list elements, I will explain it, that is not, I'll explain it later on. And required is something like some form controls are mandatory to be entered, right? You might have noticed that in some form submission, some of the fields are required. For example, username and password or something is a very mandatory field. So if you want to specify those kind of mandatory field, then you can specify the required, and the browser will verify the entered information whether it is true. For example, if you have specified the email, the browser will check it and say whether it is in the email format. If it is not in the email format, it will say the entered information is not in the email format, or please enter the correct email information. So it will just check the value and then verify the value. Okay, and the placeholder attribute is the tip for the user entering. For example, when I didn't specify any tip here, but if you use the tip attribute, when you hover over the page, it will just specify what is that particular information is about. So most of the form control will have the tooltip, right? So when you hover over the particular form control, the tips will appear. So what you have to enter, please enter your email address, or some kind of tip will be provided. So that is provided by using this placeholder attribute. Okay, and the table index and access key. Access key is the shortcut key, that is to move over the form control from one form control to another form control in shortcut key by keyboard control without using the mouse. How to move from one form control to another form control. So that is configured, that is customized by this access key. And the table index, it is also for the keyboard movement, like without using the mouse, how you can move from one form control to another form control by providing an index to the form control. For example, you can see this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. Like that, you can just change the tab index, so that from here, instead of going here, the form control will go to here. Okay, so if you want to have that kind of configuration, then you can use the tab index. As I told you, please take your time, pause the video and digest the concepts, because the attribute what I have explained here is going to be saved for all other form controls. So please take your time to digest the concepts before jumping into the next form control. Okay, so take your time, pause the video and refer the different materials what I have provided to understand this concept. This form control, the attributes are going to be same for other form controls. So I'm not going to explain, since it is going to be same for other form controls. Just understand it before moving on to the next concept. Okay, so the next thing, submit button. So I have already showed a demo how the submit button will work, right? So the type value should be submit. So that will connect with the server-side scripting and send the entered information to the particular server-side scripting language. And then reset button, it will just reset the values what I have entered. I have already explained this, so I'm moving on to the next concept. So also I have explained the attributes, what these attributes will do: name, ID, value, which is even we have changed the value in the code in the previous. I have explained how to change the value, all those stuff, right? So that is what explained here in this PPT, in this slide. So let's move on to the next form control. So if you are ready, let's get into the concept. Checkbox. How to include checkbox type of form control in your web page. So to include checkbox form control, all you need to specify is you have to specify the value checkbox to the type attribute. Okay, so I will show it in W3 School website. Go to the W3 School website. Okay, so you can see that here input type checkbox have some ID name. So I will just click the try demo. So you can see how we display this checkbox here. Input type checkbox, vehicle ID vehicle 1, name vehicle 1, and the value bike. Okay, and then here the label is there, and then here whatever the value you are displaying with the checkbox. Okay, so I have a bike has a vehicle 1 ID and name. I have a car has a vehicle 2 ID and 2 name, and I have a boat vehicle 3 ID and name. Okay, so all of them has the attribute value checkbox. So this is how you will include checkbox in your form. Okay, so it's easy. Checkbox. How to include different kind of checkbox by specifying the value checkbox. So you have to specify the ID and name. and the value of that particular. So it doesn't matter. So these values what you have entered is only for server side scripting. But for the display of the web page, whatever you have specified here, that will be displayed as a checkbox here. Good. So the next thing that we are going to see is, so the attribute, refer the attributes for the checkbox, the same explanation. The radio button. You're going to learn how to include a radio button. So before that, what is the difference between checkbox and radio button? Like pause the video and think about that. What is the difference between the checkbox and radio button? Checkbox is something like it will let you to enter all the values. Whatever is provided in the option, it will let you to select all the value. That is checkbox. And radio button is something like it will let you to select only one value. For example, gender information or country, which from country or from, so those kind of information which will have only one value, right? So those kind of values, those kind of instance needs check boxes. Mostly gender form, the gender information will have the check boxes, right? So let's see how to code the radio button. So you can see the value of the type attributes should be specified as the radio to include the radio button and the ID and the name. So you can specify the difference between the checkbox and radio button is, in checkbox you are specifying the value checkbox, but in radio button you are specifying the value of the type as radio. Other than that, you can see some other information. The name of the checkbox should be same. You can refer the checkbox. The name of the radio button should be the same. You can see everything is gender. But in checkbox, you can refer each checkbox will have different name. But radio button, each radio button should have a same name but different ID. So note down this point. It is very important point. The checkbox should have different names for each control, but the radio button should have the same name but different ID value, right? So that's what that's how you have to use the radio button. So you know the use case for the radio button, in which place you have to go for the radio button and which place you have to go for the checkbox. Okay, so then the attributes of the radio button. And the next thing is hidden field. What is hidden field? So the hidden field should have a value hidden. I'll check the W3 School website for hidden. Just go and see the hidden type. So what is this hidden type will do? The hidden type, what will happen when you use the hidden type? Let me check whether they have the hidden type. So the hidden button is what will happen when you specify a particular value of the type as a hidden, then it will not appear. It will not be visible in the browser viewport. The entered value which is there inside the hidden will not appear to the viewer in the viewport, but it can be accessed by the server-side scripting language or client-side scripting language. That is a PHP or any kind of server-side scripting language will get the entered user input, but it will not be visible for the user. For example, let's say the password information. Normally the password, we have a different type to process the password. The value is going to be password, but just for your understanding, the password, if you use the hidden, it will be hidden, but from the users, like user cannot view that after entering, but it will be processed by the server-side scripting. So those kind of fields are hidden fields, and you have to use the value hidden for those kind of controls. But as I have specified, for the password, you don't need to use the hidden. You have to use the control called password. It has the value called password. So for the password control, the value entered will be replaced with asterisk or circle. I'll show it in the W3 School website. For the password, you can see, go to the demo. So you can see the username and the password. The username, the value, it's autocomplete, right? The password, whatever I'm entering, that will be hidden, or not hidden, but it will be replaced, encrypted. It will be encrypted. So when you specify the value password, then it will be encrypted, and then submit button, right? So that is how the password control works. Okay, so then its own value and text area element. So for text area, it is going to be different. We are not going to use the input type. For text area, it is something different. For most of the form controls will have the input as a tag, but for the text area, it is some kind of different. I'll show you. So you can see the text area. So to include the comments, so for example, to include a section to enter users, to get users commands, then you have to go for the text area control. So when you specify the text area control, so you can see text area is the tag that you have to use. You cannot use input tag. I repeat, you cannot use input tag. You have to use text area tag. Okay. So the name of the text area and then rows and calls attribute will specify how many rows you want to specify and how many columns. You can, if you specify 30, then you can enter. You can see there are 30 characters. That 30 values can be entered in the column and 10 row information can be entered. Okay. So for example, if I am changing it to 4, run. So you can see the row information is 4. And if I am changing the column to 10, you can see now it is only 10. Okay. So how big you want your text area, you can specify that by using the rows and calls attribute. And tag text area is the tag that you have to use. You cannot use the input tag. For including the comment area, you always have to use this text area tag. Okay. So note down this, which is different from other form controls. Text area is different from other form controls. And but attributes are almost same. You can just refer the attributes. And then next thing that we are going to see is select area. Select. So you might have seen this kind of form controls that will pop up. That will give us the pop-up option to get select, right? So how to include this select attribute? How to include the select attribute? Let me go and check whether we have select. So you can just refer in W3 School website page for the select area. So how to include this type of option, like giving a kind of option for the user so that user can select some from given option. So to include this kind of form control, this is the code. You have to use the tag called select tag. So you have to wrap up that options with the select tag, and each option, Volvo, sound, audio, all those things are, all those values are given as absent tag. So you have to use the absent tag with the value attribute to specify the value. So all those options should be wrapped up by the select attribute. So to give this kind of drop down list kind of option, you have to go for this select tag. So this is the syntax to use the select tag. So select and then option. Okay. So you have learned another new attribute. So other than text area, even the select element is kind of different. You cannot use input tag. You have to use select tag to provide this kind of form control for the user, right? That is about the select tag. And you can see the select size. You can specify the size attribute that will give you the option like how many values you want to see visible in the here. If you specify 1, then only one value will be here. If you specify 2, then 2. 1 minute. So you can see what is this attribute size will have. What is the size attribute will have? Let me check. Let me explain it in demo. So I'm going to add one more attribute here, the size attribute. So in size attribute, I'm going to specify 3. Okay, so you can see by default, so 1 minute. So when you specify the size 3, you can see the 3 values will appear always in the select button. For example, if I specify 2, then you can see only 2 values will be appear visible. Okay, so let's add one more. Let's add one more car, Tesla. So you can see how many cars I have. If I specify all the 5 cars, you can see all the 5 cars will appear here. Okay. So this is how the select area works. So remember, all of you have to have a form control in your form page in your final project. So just think about the form controls that you may need to include. Okay, select area, text area. We are seeing a lot of form controls. So the next thing that we are going to see is label attribute. So the label tag. So the label tag is helpful to label all kind of form control. Okay, so the label tag is common for all kind of form control. If you go to your student file, go to 10.5 where you can see this code, right? So let's open up the code 10.5. Open up 10.5. So you can see the code for this. The code for this. So we have a form with post method, input type text is there. How many text areas? So 2 text boxes and then 1 text area. You can see the text area and the submit button. We have some 4 form controls here, and you can see how I am wrapping up all the form controls with the label tag. So it's a accessibility kind of criteria. Like it will not be visible when you specify the label tag. It will not be visible here in the browser, but it will be visible for the server-side scripting, or even it will be visible for the accessibility criteria for someone who is using some external tool. For someone who has the vision disability, if they are using a separate tool to understand, to read the web page, then that tool can understand, the external tool can understand if you specify the label. Okay, so it is useful for accessibility criteria and even for the design CSS. So you can see it uses as a selector. We use it as a selector. So you can see when we provide a design for our page in CSS, we are using it as a selector. So float left, background color, you can specify any kind of styling information by using this label as a selector, right? So that is label selector. So that is the use of label tag. So next we are going to see field set. What is field set? So field set is something that helps us like to group the form element together. For example, go to 10.6. Go to 10.6. Sorry, not 10.6. Let me check. So in your in your student file, you can see fieldset.html, right? So please open that page, fieldset.html. Open that page. So there you can see this page where you can see we are grouping up the building address kind of information together because those are some similar kind of information. So we are grouping together just for providing a better like just for understanding, like we are just grouping for the similar kind of elements will be grouped together so that it is easy for the user to access it. Okay, let me open up the code for this. Open it in Notepad. So you can see the field set. Where is the code for the field set? Yeah, here it is, right? So field set, you can see how I'm grouping the city, all the input type text for city, state, zip, all those elements are grouped together, wrapped together with the field set. When you wrap all those elements as a field set, it will create a visible box so that it will provide a better proximity information, like all the similar information are grouped together inside the box. Okay, so to provide this kind of grouping, you can use this field set tag. Okay, so wherever you want to group the elements together, you can simply use the field set. It will just group the form visibly. It will just give the visible feeling that these controls are grouped together. Okay, so that is the use of field set tag. Okay, so then a few other elements. Email. So I'll tell you. So simply you can use the username or text box for the email tag, right? Why do we need a specific separate element? We can simply use a email. Sorry, let me go to the page control. You can simply use the text box for the email, right? So why do we need a specific, you can simply use text box. Why do we need specific email type form control? What is the meaning of that? What is the use of separate email type when we have the text box, when we can use the text box? The reason is when we use the email, I'll give a demo. When I use the email, I cannot simply, so you can see when I just specify some information, it is saying that please include some email address. It doesn't look like an email address. Specify some email address. Those kind of validation will be done when you specify specifically specify the text box should be of email type. Okay. So this validation will be done when you use the email checkbox. So you can refer it in your student file. You have a separate file for email where it will provide the same thing. Please include the email address. Okay, so you can refer the coding for that. So you can see you're using the type email. Okay, so that is the difference between the text box and email. So you can, it will just do the validation for us. Similarly, the URL type. So the same reason you can use the text box. Why do we need a special type URL? I'll explain it in W3 School website. Right? Simply you can use the email or text box. Why you need a specific URL address? So it is not, the demo is not that here. I'll open up your student file. I think you can find a file called url.html. Double click it, open it. So you can see it doesn't look like an URL. It doesn't look like a website address, right? So to provide this kind of validation, you have to use a type URL so that it will just validate and we'll see it doesn't look like a website address. It doesn't look like a address of a website. So give a correct website address. So that kind of validation will be done. And similarly, a telephone for the telephone number. For the phone number, you can use the value attribute, a type attribute value as TEL. So when you specify TEL attribute, then it will just check whether the entered information looks like a phone number or like it's an actual phone number or not. Okay, so that could be verified. So for that, you can go to the student file and open up the tel.html. So there I'm giving the alphabetical number. It will just verify whether it is a phone number or not. Okay. And similarly, the search keyword. So whether it looks like a keyword or not, it is whether it looks like an appropriate keyword or not. That kind of validation can be done when you specify the value attribute as search. Type attribute value as search. So the another very important element that we are going to see is data list element. So what is data list element? So data list element is almost same like the select list drop down menu. It's almost same, like it will just give you the option, but in addition to giving option, it will also let the user to enter their own information. You might have experienced this kind of form entry, like some form controls will let you to select the option or even it will let you to enter your own information. So if you want to provide those kind of form control, then instead of select list form control, you have to use the data list form control. You have to use data list. So I'll show you how it works. So you can see here, instead of select, you're using a data list. So just verify the select form control that I have explained before and then compare that with this. Select, instead of this keyword select, you have to use the data list, and then everything else are same. Okay. So if I show the demo, you can see when I click onto this, it will just let you to give the option. It will just show you the option, but in addition to the given option, it gives me the the option to enter. Okay, so instead of selecting it from the list, even it will let you to enter your own information, right? So that is possible by the select list option. So when you specify the select list, you also have to specify the input tag. Okay, you also have to specify the input tag to get the text input. So that is about the data list form control. So that will, I repeat, data list form control will let you to select from the user list, and also it will let you to enter your own information. So for those kind of form control, you have to go for the data list. So in addition to the data list, you also have to specify a separate form control to enter the input. So you can see that is where you are entering your own input, right? So in addition to this, you have to specify the separate input tag of text type or any type. Okay, so the next form control that we are going to see is slider control. It is like a visual interactive interface, like instead of specifying the numerical information, it will let you to select a range. So it will be hard for you to visualize it. Please open the student file and open up the page range.html, where you can see to provide a review or to provide any kind of value between these two threshold, you can use this slider. This is called slider control. So you can use the slider control kind of input. So what is the slider control will do? It will just map a particular spatial information to numerical information, right? So how can we do that? Open up the code for this slider control, the range.html. Open up the code in Notepad. So you can see, I'll close the other pages. So you can see the range control. So you can see the label, input type, range. So you have to specify the values between lower threshold to higher threshold. Minimum value is 1. So the low will be associated with the 1 and high will be associated with the 100. Okay. So you have to specify the low and high, whatever value you want to specify. For example, if I want to change it to min and max. Okay, so save. I can see now I have changed to min and max. So whatever value you want to specify, in between that, you have to include this range control. Okay. The min value is 1 and the max value is 100. Even you can change it to 10, whatever value. So the attribute value for min is the minimum value. Attribute value for the max attribute is 100. Whatever value you want to specify, that value will be mapped. Okay. So this kind of form control will be specified by simply using the type value as range, right? Simply you can use the input tag and specify the value range. So then it will include this slider control. Okay. So this to get the numerical kind of information from the user. Similarly, there is another control called spinner control. The spinner control is also useful to get the numerical information from the user. Okay, so go and use the spinner.html. You open up this page and open the code. Open up the code where you can see this provides some GUI environment to provide the numerical information, right? So how can we code it? So you can see the spinner control. To include the spinner control, you have to use the value of the input type as number. So when you specify the value of the type attribute number, then it will include this numerical interpretation. Okay, so similar to the slider control, you can specify the min and max value. Okay, so it will just let you to go through the values. Okay, loop through the values. You can loop through the values when you specify the spinner control by using this value of the type attribute number, right? So that is spinner control. So that's how you can include spinner control in your web page. So the next thing that you are going to see is how to include for a calendar in your web page. How to include calendar in your web page. It's interesting, right? So it's you can include this GUI calendar facility. So we have been using it in our regular day-to-day life, but including a form control is very simple. Simply you are going to use the input tag with the value type of the type attribute date. It will the HTML5 will take care of the remaining job, like it will just include the calendar in your website. To explore this, go to your student file, open up date.html. Okay, so you can see when you click onto this, it will open up the control to select a particular date, right? So let's look at the coding for this. So you can see this GI facility, we can bring it simply by specifying the input type, date. It will do the rest of the job for us. Okay, simply are specifying the type attributes as date, and then the associated GI facility, which is that associated with the basic HTML5, will display a calendar for us. Okay, so this is how you can include a date in your date calendar in a calendar in your website. Okay. And then color well. How to include a color well, like a selection. Some websites may, for example, if it is a shopping kind of website where a user has to select, for example, so online shopping for dresses where the user has to select a particular color. They have all the possible colors. So if they are letting the user to select a particular color, then they can simply see color well. They can simply include a color well here. So the code is very simple. Open up the color.html page in your student file in browser and also open up the code. You can see simply by specifying the color, the value, color as a value to the type attribute, you can simply include the color well in your web page, right? So very simple. Okay. So this is how you can include color well in your web page, color well control. Okay, similarly, the designing, CSS designing, it's totally, we have practiced so much on the designing. So you can apply your creativity and you can just apply colors to your form or design your form. We have practiced all those necessary coding that we need to design it. You can just apply your creativity and make your form look beautiful by specifying those CSS attribute, by specifying the selectors. It could be a HTML element selector, or even you can create a class or div selector to apply design on your form. Okay, I'm just leaving it up to you how to style your form. Okay, so just a review on things what we have discussed. We have first, I will just finish up that. So what is there after that? I have just explained how the server-side scripting works. That means I have already explained when I start this lecture, I have explained how the client and server communicate with each other and process the information, how the form control acts like a bridge and get the information from the user and send it to the server-side processing. I have explained it. I explained everything in the starting of the tutorial. So this is what given in the slides. Okay. So even we have discussed a lot in our when we start this semester. The first few weeks, I have explained all those concepts on how the basic internet works, how the client connection between the browser and the server, how they communicate with each other, what are the different protocols. So all those things, basic things, I have covered the first few weeks of the course. Okay, so you can just refer all those materials if you want. But before that, I just want to do a short review on what we have discussed in this chapter. We started with the different types of websites, static and dynamic website. What is static website? What is dynamic website? Static is like same information for everyone, static. If it shows different information for different users, then it is dynamic. all kind of information pages which requires the username and password protection that are dynamic website, right? And then form controls, how to include form, what are the different building blocks, the form and the server-side processing. And in this chapter, we are covering how to include the form. Form will act like a bridge between the user and the server. Okay, so that gets the information from the user and present it to the processing, to the server-side processing. And then we have seen how to include what is the form tag that actually initiates all kind of form controls. Every form control should be wrapped up by this form control, right? Okay, that is the form tag. So parent tag for all the form controls. So mother tag for all the form controls. So you have to wrap up all the controls inside the form tag. And what are the attributes? So I have explained it with server-side scripting language. With the real server-side scripting language, I have explained what is action and what is method. So action is the server-side scripting file, and then method is in which how the information is sent to the server, either get method or post method. Get means unsecured way through the URL, and post is secured way as a separate HTML entity. And then autocomplete name and ID, those are the other form attributes. And the form controls, different type of form controls are there. Text box, and then we have seen how the submit button will work with the input tag, and the reset button, and then how the checkbox will work. So the same input tag, if you use checkbox as a value, and then for including the radio button, for the same input tag, you have to specify the tab value at radio. And what is the difference between the radio and checkbox? The name should be same for the radio button, but ID should be different. For the checkbox, both name and ID should be different. So that is the difference between the checkbox and radio button. In application wise, the radio button will not let you to select more than one element, but the checkbox will let you to select more than one element, right? And then what is hidden field? Hidden field will let you to enter the information. The viewport will not show it, but the information what you have entered can be accessed by the server-side scripting language, right? So that is called hidden field. So to include hidden field, you have to use the value hidden. Similarly, password, all the password form control will have this type, input control, form control type with the value password. So when you specify the password, the entered value will not be visible to the user in the viewport. It will just show it as an encrypted character, right? So that is password type, password form control. And then text area. So for including text area, you have to use a tag called text area tag. You cannot use the input tag. You have to use the tag called text area tag. Similarly, for select element, to give the pop down menu option, drop down menu option, pop up menu option, you have to use the select tag. Inside that, you have to provide the option. The data list is same as that, but the data list let the user to input their own information, right? That is the difference between the select and data list. And then labeling, and then how to group the form controls together by using the field set. And then email, so validation. Let the user, if you specify a particular, whether the particular form control is for email, instead of text box, you can use email form control so that the browser will do the validation for you. Similarly, for the URL, it will check whether the particular entered information is a particular website, is in website form or different. It will not check whether it is a it's actual website, but it will check whether the entered information is in website form with the .com, with .org, with all the top level domain name information. It will check that. It will validate that information. And telephone will check whether it is telephone, and then take, and then what else? Data list I have explained. Slider control to provide the slider numerical information interpretation, and the spinner control. And then calendar, how to include calendar by specifying the date. You can just check the W3 school website. They don't have only the date, they have a lot of other controls. Date, time, local, a time control, right? So they have other a lot of controls to manipulate the date and time, okay? So you can just refer their website in your textbook. They don't offer all the different kind, they just spoke about the date, but Actually, HTML5 has a lot of form controls to manipulate the timing. So you can just refer W3 School website, okay, and then color well. So how to include a color kind of input from the user by using the color well control, okay, by simply specifying the color value. Okay, and then you can apply your creativity to design your website, to design your form control. Okay, so this is the theory part. In a separate video tutorial, I'm going to explain you how to include a form control in your web page, in your yoga website. Okay, so I'll see you in the next tutorial. Take care. Thank you.